So next up, we're going to have Bernalillo County Master Composters. So John Zarola here is part of the Bernalillo County Master Composters, a nonprofit that educates and supports New Mexicans on turning their food waste into a beneficial resource for the soil. The high desert climate here, of course, can be a complicating factor when it comes to giving back to the soils through composting, but the Master Composters, fortunately, are here to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to ask John to unmute here, and he can take it away.
There we are. And are you seeing that yet?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll look at that. Okay.
Good enough. Good morning, everybody. Neighbors. The Bernalillo County Extension Master Composters has been in effect since 2010, and we share home composting information with the interested public. Our website is nmcomposters.org, and if you go there on the left menu, you will see a selection for desert composting, and I'm going to be following the guidelines that are in that brochure, so you're welcome to read it. And if we don't get to your questions today, you can send us a composting question at any time at compost-questions@nmcomposters.org, and one of us will answer your questions. So composting recycles residual organic material to produce a useful soil amendment, thereby avoiding the landfill. Compost is transformed to humus in the soil. And so carbon is stored in the soil as humus. And so as composters, we're going to be organizing and managing organic material so that it biologically decomposes. And that decomposition is the transformation of the organic material to finished compost. And this is all done by naturally occurring microorganisms in the presence of air and moisture. So organic material, and we're using the word organic, meaning that anything that was once alive, and that includes both plant and animal. So you see the pictures there, household paper products, clippings from the garden, fruit and vegetable scraps from the kitchen, leaves from the yard, and a variety of animal manures are all included in organic material. So what we follow is the composting recipe, and this is universal. This is the same all over the planet. So we're going to combine those organics with water, make sure it has air, give it time, and we'll eventually end up with a finished product. So following the top of the rectangle there, the browns plus the greens, then you add water and air, and the macroorganisms and the microorganisms complete the transformation to a finished product. So let's talk a little bit about the green and the brown organic materials. We divide the organics by their colors. So browns we're surrounded by in the desert. They're high in carbon, and they provide nutrients for the microbes that are naturally present in the composting operation. Important point is, alone, they decompose slowly. Greens, on the other hand, are usually moist and can have a preponderance of nitrogen, and they provide for microbial nutrition and, importantly, protein for reproduction and cell wall formation. So when you mix the greens and the browns together, then decomposition goes well. So a simple blend is 2 to 1. So for every 2 parts brown, you may add 1 part green, and that provides a fine menu for the microorganisms in the pile. There are some products that are brown in color, but actually they are nitrogenous or they are greens, and that would be all manures and coffee grounds. So let's take a look at combining some homestead greens and browns. On the left of the screen, browns would be dry leaves in the fall, a variety of paper products that you might have in the home. And then on the right side of the screen are greens, which would be clippings from the garden, fresh clippings, and then fruit, vegetable scraps from the kitchen. So if you combine 2 parts brown with 1 part green, then you have a good menu for the microbes to proliferate. Some additions that have come up over the years: crushed eggshells are fine. Moldy organic products are fine. Liquid leftovers, coffee, tea, soda, wine, and beer. And then, of course, you can repurpose your kitchen water to add to your composting operation. A little bit about what one might avoid adding: diseased plants or weeds with seeds. Wood ash is inorganic and it's quite alkaline. So if you were to add that, I would do it very sparingly. If you're a barbecuer, any charcoal that has petrochemical accelerants in it. Meat, fish, dairy, lard, margarine, oil, and nut butters. Those are all organic. The reason they're on the do not add list is because those scents from those things may attract critters. Now, if you wanted to add small amounts of those to your composting operation, you would be welcome to do so, but it's your choice. Any chemically treated wood products: dog, cat, pig, pet bird manure, chicken is okay. So all of those animals have diseases which are possibly communicable to us. It's a very rare event. But if you wanted to compost those manures, I would suggest you use the hot process composting method. And that would kill any pathogens that happen to be in there. Glossy colored or wax paper, anything inorganic: metal, glass, plastic, synthetic fibers, or styrofoam. Now, any of those that happen to get into your compost bin are not going to bother the decomposition process. You'll just remove them when you collect your finished product. As much as possible, avoid pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and vermicides. So composting management, which we're going to get into now, is adjusted to suit the climate in which it is practiced. So we're at a high, dry desert here in central New Mexico. So one of our great challenges is to manage evaporation of moisture. And so we use low porosity bins and containers, which we'll review in just a moment. So organizing containers, they can either be homemade or manufactured. The manufactured ones are easy to add to and easy to harvest from usually. They're neat and tidy, especially for urban, suburban backyards. They facilitate air and moisture management. And they're movable. There are many styles and choices. We'll come back to that in a minute. They're a one-time expense, and you may have as many as you need. They also reduce flying insects, critters, and predators. So I choose this bin because, in my opinion, it's really inappropriate for high desert composting use because everything you put in there will evaporate very quickly because it is really too porous, too many holes. So if you have a bin like this, then I would cover or block all of those holes except for a few at the bottom. Of course, put it in the shade now in the summer months. Um, we'll come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to compare two different composting bins, the stationary tower on the left and the tumbler bin on the right. So the tower has two openings, one at the top and one at the bottom. The one at the bottom is kept closed at all times, except when you are removing your finished compost. And your product in a tower bin will always be at the bottom. The tumbler has only one opening, and that's used to add to and remove from the bin itself. And the issue with tumblers sometimes is that people find confusing is that you're frequently adding undecomposed organic material to that which is already decomposed, and you're mixing it in, and that causes confusion for some homeowners. The answer to that confusion is to regularly harvest from that bin and separate out what is undecomposed from what is already decomposed. So both of these bins reliably produce a product if they're well managed. Stack blocks certainly can be used to make a bin. I want to point out to you in the lower right that this composter has covered the top of the pile when he or she is not using it. That is to help moisture preservation here in the high desert. So bins and containers, there's such a variety of them. As I mentioned, some are manufactured, some are homemade, and so there are many choices. We'll go over some of those presently. So if you want to make a bin, for example, out of a trash can, that's a very easy thing to do. Holes on the bottom for drainage, and then a few holes along the bottom edge for air intake. I would call your attention to the upper right there. That bin is, trash can bin is not appropriate for desert composting. That'll work well in Pennsylvania, but not here. So if you're going to make or perhaps purchase a bin, I have some suggestions for you. Shop online, look at the pictures, compare models, prices and gallons. Amazon.com, Home Depot, and Lowe's all have pictures of the compost bins that they sell. A new bin is going to cost, a good news bin is going to cost about $100, $200. You may find some of these bins at yard sales or thrift stores. Look for a low porosity bin with just a few holes at the bottom. Take time to consider how you're going to use it on your homestead. And then you can size the gallons to accommodate your homestead needs. Small sizes are easier to move and manage for beginners and for seniors. So one of the important variables that we have to manage here in the desert is moisture. And most of the books will say 50 to 60% throughout the process. Well, what is that? I compare 50 to 60% moisture similar to the residual moisture content of freshly brewed coffee grounds. Moist, but not dripping. So if you're not familiar with that, if you brew tea or coffee, then squeeze the tea bag, rip it open, and notice how that moisture glistens on the tea. Or do the same thing with your coffee. When you finish brewing your coffee, look at how the moisture is in those coffee grounds, and then compare that moisture to unbrewed coffee, and I think you'll see the difference. Moist coffee kind of glistens, and it's darker than unbrewed coffee. And if you want to feel it, just stick your finger in there, and then you'll get an idea of the moisture level that should be in your composting operation in all seasons. So one maneuver we're going to do here in the desert to manage evaporation is to cover the top of the pile. So if you look at the picture in the upper right there, this composter has used a repurposed piece of plastic to cover the top of the pile when he or she is not working in it. Another maneuver is to wet or soak dry stuff, which are usually browns, before adding them. So something like a paper egg carton. You can rip that up and put it in a saucepan and let it soak for half an hour, and then add that to your composting operation. So add your moist materials, then maintain moisture. And as it's summer's coming up, we're probably going to have to sprinkle a little bit to keep the moisture level up. And we need that moisture in there in our composting operation um, because the microorganisms can only function in a thin film of moisture on the organic material. So it's within that thin film of moisture they secrete the enzymes which transform the organic material to a finished product. So if your composting operation goes dry, it'll either slow down or shut down. Another maneuver to improve decomposition is increasing the surface area of the feedstock. And basically that means just make everything smaller than it was originally because smaller decomposes faster, because when you give something more surface area, then it can absorb moisture. Once the moisture is there, then the microorganisms can be active. So my take-home message is chop before you drop. We're going to use coarse bulking material in the method I'm going to describe for you today for aeration. Now, this may be, if you're already composting, this may be a new concept for you. If you're not composting, then you're going to learn about it right now. So what we can use for what we call coarse bulking is pine cones, sticks and twigs, corn cobs, wood chips or stalks from sunflowers or corn. So what does coarse bulking do for us? Well, it decreases the compaction of wet organics. It provides fluff in the composting setup. And by doing that, it helps convective airflow throughout the pile. So if you look at the picture on the lower right, this demonstrates convective airflow in the pile. And it's the blue arrows that are moving upward that are the airflow in the pile, secondary to bulking as we build a pile. And notice the top of the pile has a drape on it. So because we're going to use low porosity bins here in the desert, we compensate for that. We compensate for airflow by using coarse bulking material. Now, this is usually woody recalcitrant material that's really slow to decompose. So it just kind of sits there. So this is really useful in static composting. And then we're going to screen out this bulking material and reuse it all over again. And I'll show you a picture of how to do that in just a sec here. So when we bulk as we build, we get a chimney effect from the bulking, as you can see in the arrows on the left there. This is what I call convective aeration. So you see the coarse material added in this bin on the right. And as I said, the take-home message is bulk as you build. So as I mentioned, when you bulk a composting operation, you decrease compaction of wet organic material, thereby improving the airflow. And this assists the aerobic conditions within the bin. And by doing this, you also help avoid odors in a composting setup, because most often odors are caused by the compaction of wet organics. When you do that, then the anaerobic bacteria take over and they are the ones that produce the smelly gases. So if you bulk as you build, you will avoid odors. So this is really useful in static composting in low porosity containers. And we're going to get to that in just a second. So as I said, this bulking material will not decompose at the same rate as your other materials. So when you collect your finished compost, either from your tower bin or your tumbler bin, then it's very simple to screen it. And then you can use something really simple like one of those plastic baskets on the bottom there. And then the finished compost, which looks like chocolate cake crumbs, will go through the holes in the basket, and the chunky stuff will remain. And then you take that chunky bulking material, set it aside in a 5-gallon bucket, and then it's ready to be used all over again when you continue your operation. So I'm going to talk about the static decomposition method. And this method copies or mimics natural decomposition that here in New Mexico you might find on a moist forest floor. If you look to the right, that's what our soil in New Mexico often looks like when it doesn't have moisture. But if you look to the left, that's a nice moist forest floor. And you might find something like this in the Jemez Canyon or in some of the canyons in the Sandia. So we're going to copy what nature does in this system. Now notice nature doesn't go out there with a pitchfork and rough things up and turn them over. She just drops things to the soil, and because air and moisture is present, they decompose. So we're going to follow this method, and turning is not required for decomposition to occur. So let's talk about static composting in a container. Choose and use a low porosity bin. I've already mentioned that several times. Place the bin on the soil, in the shade, near a water source if you can. Follow the composting recipe. Collect and store your coarse bulking material. Store it in a bucket close to your compost bin so that when you need it, you can spread it in there as you bulk as you build. Mix greens with browns if you can. Chop, shred organic material before you add them. Pre-soak any dry browns before adding. Avoid compacting any addition. So what I mean by that is if your bin is getting full and you have an addition that's not going to fit in there, don't push down on what's in the bin in order to accommodate more. Because by compacting, you're going to eliminate the air spaces in there. So don't treat your compost bin the way you would a trash can. Add bulking material as you build up the pile. Cover the top of the pile inside the bin, then put the lid on. So if you see the lady there is making an addition to her bin, and you'll notice, by the way, that that bin has no holes in it. Either that or they're way at the bottom where you can't see them. So after she's already pulled out her cover. So if she were to bend over, what she would be looking at is the top contents of the bin inside the bin. And that's where we put our cover drape, okay? That eliminates upward evaporation from the content inside the bin. And then of course you put the cover on the bin itself. So to continue static composting, check and maintain moisture in all seasons, add water as necessary. You will get a finished product from this method in about 6 to 12 months here in central New Mexico. So I call this dump and run, dump and done. This is a fine choice for urban, suburban homes. And kids can do it, and it's also easy for seniors. It's very convenient and it's reliable. And my suggestion is collect your finished compost regularly and put it to use. So this is a cutaway of a tower composting bin, which illustrates what happens inside the bin as decomposition occurs. So looking at the top, what goes in today, for example, will end up at the bottom in anywhere from 3 to 6 months as finished product. And you can see the difference there in the bottom layer. It looks like, as I compared earlier to chocolate cake crumbs. So as you add stuff to the bin and they begin to decompose, then what? The particles get smaller and smaller, and the top drops down and giving you more space to add organic material. And then when you harvest regularly from the bottom of the bin, when you pull that out, everything above is going to drop down, and that gives you more, once again, more space to add your organics. And so this is, once you get this cycle started and you maintain it, it continues, it just goes on and on. So my suggestion would be to regularly amend your desert garden soil. Spring and fall are common times. You can top amend your soil with 4 inches of, after you've amended your soil, you can top it with 4 inches of organic mulch, as you see in the picture there. And then at our elevation, we're about 20%, our ultraviolet radiation is about 20% higher than at sea level. So some of us choose to do shading, as you can see in the picture there on the upper right. Some common sense suggestions. If you have wounds on your hands, cover them up and then wear gloves. And anytime you have touched soil or any compost, avoid touching your face or your mucous membranes. Surely you can consider a tetanus booster if you're a gardener composter. And most importantly, scrub your hands and clean your vegetables. So home composting is recycling, which when properly managed, gives back a continuous supply of a finished product. So pay attention to the recipe. Composting is experiential. You do it, you learn it, and then be patient. Follow the suggestions for bulking and moisture management. If you would, read Desert Composting at nmcomposters.org. And static composting leads to success. So if what you've heard today is new information, then just take time to think about it, integrate it, and practice it. So once again, I would encourage you to go to our website and read the selection on the left menu called Desert Composting. And if you have questions at any time, you can send them to us at compost-questions@nmcomposters.org. And please include your zip code and be very complete and clear about your questions so we can answer it for you. So host, back to you.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, and actually we do have a couple quick questions in just a couple of minutes here. So I want to actually run them by you. So one of our attendees asked, would pine needles work as well for aeration when you were talking about bulking up the compost bin?
Possibly, if you use 2 or 3 inches of them. I would suggest something bulkier though, like sticks and twigs, pine cones, corn cobs. I think
Okay.
that would work a bit better, but you're welcome to experiment with that.
All right, thank you. Another question was, can paper products with ink on them be composted? So things like junk mail, that sort of thing.
Yes, I think so. If you're skittish about that, or you don't think it's a good idea, then just leave it out. But most of my colleagues, we do compost most of those things. Most paper products go well, except those that are coated with plastic or wax, or any highly pigmented paper like gift wrapping at Christmas time. You know, you could go easy on that stuff. That can be recycled in your in your recycle bin.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question I saw here was, do you need to start a compost bin with some soil, or is layering and compost material enough?
So I think the first part of the question is about soil. The first thing you add to any of the bins in the method I described to you today is 6 to 12 inches of bulking material. You always bulk at the bottom, and that's going to allow for convective airflow. Then you add 5 inches of organic material, your greens and browns, and then the bulking you do next, and it can be anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of bulking material. So you just keep that layering process going on. And this is well described in the desert composting brochure. If you want to add soil to your composting operation, that is your choice. It is not required. Okay. The history of that is that years ago, especially Albert Howard, who is the father of modern composting, he was experimenting in the 20s and the 30s in India, was adding soil to his composting piles. What a lot of people don't understand is that the soil he was adding was from an animal shed. So the animals were defecating on that soil, and they were also urinating on that soil. So that soil had nitrogen in it. So just to put this in a proper context, adding soil in small amounts is certainly fine. It is not required, okay? So when you add soil, you're doing a couple of things. You're adding the microorganisms that are naturally present in a well-amended soil, and you are adding mineral nutrients, which the microbes might use up in the process. But soil in and of itself is inorganic. It's made up of sand, silt, and clay particles. So those particles may interact in the composting process, but basically they're going to come out of the compost bin almost the same as they went in.
All right. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate all that information. And then if anybody didn't catch it from the slide, we posted in chat that email address to send other questions. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Thanks, JR.
You're welcome.